right, hello everybody. Great to see so many folks here. I am truly so excited to be here in space with you guys, thinking about things, sharing conversation, getting to hear ideas from our visiting artists. It's truly like such an honor to be here. So thank you guys for joining us. So this next slide. Well, I should have grabbed the clicker. Okay, so title of this program, Who Owns Images? I Googled that, and according to Google, the photographer. And I thought that was great, so therefore we don't have to have this conversation because we have the answer. But I would like to explore this much further. I know that there's a lot of ideas around ownership, and some of us think about the legality of things. Some of us, for me personally, I think about the origin of ideas. Where do ideas come from? What is mine? What is yours? What is inspired? So this idea of who owns images can take us in many, many places, and I'm excited to see where this conversation will take us. I have a challenge for you all. You have a note card, and I want you to spend a little time thinking about what does it mean to own an image? And if you could answer that, if you could spend, and think about it, maybe someone will give you the answer during this time and you can copy that one. But I want you to really think about, like, if I were to ask you, if you were going to be the artist on stage and I ask you, what does it mean to own an image? I would love to hear what everyone else here thinks about that. Okay, so this is what we're doing today. We are exploring ideas present within the Images Unbound exhibition. This is the first exhibition curated for the Des Moines Art Center by Associate Curator Mia Laufer, who joined the Art Center in the fall of 2021. Images Unbound was initially inspired by the 1936 essay, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, by German Jewish philosopher Walter Benjamin. The works in the exhibition showcase a range of ways that reproduction plays into artwork, exploring the ubiquity of images, responding to their oversaturation in art and media, challenging who owns images, and then what happens when artists claim another's image as their own. We can go to the next slide. It's just the graphic from the show. So tonight, 4 artists with work present within the exhibition have been invited to join me tonight and share their thoughts on these fascinating ideas. I'm going to take a moment to introduce each of them before they join me on stage and share some images of their artwork with you. So the images that will be in these slides are not their artworks that are in the show. These are a selection of artworks that they shared with me in order to illustrate the kind of artwork that they make. So the first artist is Anna Gaskell. Anna Gaskell's work frequently plays with ideas of the original and the fake, the real and the copy. For the series Wonder, she photographed identical twins who long for individuality. In the Rashomon-like film Erasers, 12 girls each tell their own version of a single event. An argument between 3 children is reenacted by adults in Replayground, while swimming lessons twist fact and fiction in the story of a group of evangelical teenagers. In echo-kinetic manner, Gaskell herself mirrors the dancers' movements in the video Bella Mine. Erasers won Best Film in the Art category at the Kunstfilm Biennale in 2005. Her film Replayground, Gaskell received the award for Best Documentary Short Film in the Los Angeles Film Festival in 2009, and Gaskell has been the recipient of grants from NYFA, ArtsLink, and the Bowen Foundation in 2010. Her work is held in the permanent collections of major international institutions, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, Tate Gallery, Museum Ludwig, Cologne, the Israel Museum, Jerusalem, the Dest Foundation, Athens, and the Arts Up Fernley Museum of Modern Art in Oslo. A native of Robstown, Texas, Bobby Marinas is the Minnesota-based artist whose interdisciplinary practice considers the influence of socioeconomics, race, and the criminal justice system on Chicano-Chicanx identity. Growing up engulfed in poverty, gang culture, and drug epidemics, his interdisciplinary practice references personal experiences which reflect the candid reality of marginalized and underserved communities today. Bobby is the recipient of an Advancing Artist Grant from Southeast Minnesota Arts Council in 2015 and 2021. He was awarded a Creative Support for Individuals grant from Minnesota State Arts Board. In 2021 and 2022, he was awarded multiple grants for his online projects, Voces y Bionose, which uses art as a catalyst to explore issues in the Latinx community. His work has been featured in various exhibitions and publications throughout Minnesota and resides in private collections across the country. His work is currently featured in a group exhibition, La Line, 20 Years of Soap de Corazon at Plains Art Museum, and Meste Le Funke Intermix Remix at the Minnesota Museum of American Art. Then our third artist, Ignatius Widiapradja. Ignatius Widiapradja is an emeritus associate professor of art at Drake University, having taught there for 30 years. He was the chief creative officer at MT Jewelry in Bandung, Indonesia. He has exhibited his works in competitive and invitational exhibition nationally and in international invitational exhibitions in Southeast Asia, Canada, New Zealand, and Austria. His works have been exhibited in museums and galleries in the United States and abroad, such as the Museum of Contemporary Craft, New York City, Kunsthaus Palais, Bregenz, Austria, and the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Honolulu. In addition to his fine artworks, Ignatius has done graphic design projects for selected clientele. In 2001, he established an art and design program for Maranatha Christian University in Indonesia. He was the founder of Srivangian International LLC, an importing company of Asian antiques and art. He opened Padma Gallery, the first gallery in Iowa featuring Asian antiques and cultural artifacts, and has embarked on designing contemporary furniture and home accessories, and has had them produced in Indonesia. Currently, Ignatius Widiapradja continues to be an artist and designer, and also a freelance consultant in jewelry design and marketing strategy. He splits his time between Des Moines, Iowa, and Surabaya, Indonesia. And then our fourth artist, Xavier Tavera. After moving from Mexico City to the United States, Xavier Tavera learned what it felt like to be part of a subculture, the immigrant community. Subjected to alienation has transformed the focus of his photographs to share the lives of those who are marginalized. Images have offered insight into the diversity of numerous communities and given a voice to those who are often invisible. Tavera has shown his work extensively in the Twin Cities, nationally and internationally, including Germany, Scotland, Mexico, Chile, Uruguay, and China. His work is part of the collection of the Minneapolis Institute of Art, Plains Art Museum, Minnesota Museum of American Art, Minnesota History Center, Ramsey County Historical Society, and the Weissman Art Museum. He is a recipient of the McKnight Fellowship, Jerome Travel Award, State Arts Board, and the Bronica Scholarship. And I am Mia Boo. I am the museum educator here at the Des Moines Art Center, and I worked closely with the exhibition's curator, Mia Laufer, to invite these incredible artists, as well as had a chance to explore Mia's curiosity about the subject of this exhibition, which inspired my own curiosity, which serves as the spark to light the dialogue tonight. I invite you to allow your own curiosity to move you into this conversation. We have saved time for a Q&A following the panel, and I look forward to responding to the questions that this exploration will inspire in you. So you have those note cards. Again, think about the idea of what does it mean to own an image, and you can use that note card to write down any other questions you might have. I'm really excited to invite all of you guys to the Q&A at the end following the conversation that will happen on stage right now. So I'd like to welcome our artists up here. Thank you guys all so much for being here. I'm super grateful for your presence, for your thoughts, for this opportunity for us to share space together and ideas. So thank you guys all so much for being here. Okay, so I have questions. The first question that I'd like to ask is, according to the exhibition essay by curator Mia Laufer, throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, artists have explored the consequences and opportunities that arise when visual culture becomes untethered from its original context. In what ways have you guys done this? In which ways have you taken images from other sources or other inspiration and put them into new context into your own artwork?
Okay, I'll go.
So this is Bobby.
Yeah. So I guess real quick with me, especially specifically to this publication that we have up in this exhibition. So to come up with this publication that's out there, you might have seen the stack that's out there. There's a publication and it was a collaborative project between Javier and I. And what we did was we went to my hometown in Texas for about a week. And we documented the people and the places down there with two different approaches, me with sketches and paintings, and Javier more with portraits. So going into this, I already knew that I was going to take a lot of images. I was going to take a lot of pictures, but I knew that wasn't going to be the end result. I was going to take them and translate them emotionally, or I was going to take bits and pieces of images and just reorganize them mentally, and then have that come out as something else. So as an illustration, as a painting, something. So from the get-go with this project specifically, that's kind of how I knew that I was going to take an image that I had and transform it.
Awesome. I think about that very much, about like you allowing things outside of yourself to be your inspiration, like recognizing the people in the community, the ideas, the things that you're responding to, and then using your own way of seeing and imbuing that in the end result.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thanks. What you guys got?
Well, I think in my case, I think, I tend to use images from history, from all the different references, and then by the ability to take it and create their own new context, I guess, that allows you the freedom to be able to do that without losing its meaning, I think, and then reconstruct it on your own, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that in my case, I use the images and from historical references and then reconstruct it again, and I think that's mostly what artists do. I think we use images that is available to us, and then how we can reconstruct it. I think that gives them the uniqueness. I think in a lot of ways. Yeah.
You had mentioned just a second ago about how the images that you're using already have meaning,
Yeah.
and then you're putting them in new context. Why use something that already has meaning than creating something new? Like, what does that add to it for you?
I think to me, images is always have meaning, right? I mean, they're meaning, but also I think historical context give a different flavor to, say, even you can use the context, say, if I create a still life painting and have an image of a snake with an apple in the mouth, right? It's very obvious the references to the Genesis, right? To the book of Genesis, right? So I think artists have used those images, and in terms of narrative, our story really in contemporary stories or stories 500 years ago hasn't really changed that much. Just the context, the flavors are different. But because all our images, all what we do, it comes from just human nature, I think. And we haven't really changed that much, really.
Thank you. No, you're making me think about the fact that it's like almost impossible to create something new because so much symbolism is embedded in everything already.
It's not that I think it's new because we create it differently. Like for example, if you listen to opera, all the stories are the same stories, right? But the sound, the look, everything, how it was done, that makes it so uniquely wonderful, I think. It's not the stories are wonderful, but how artists can do it differently, that makes it different. They make it, look at photograph from Anna and Javier. I mean, well, the subject matter probably not much different, but the way it was done that make it wonderful, I think.
Thank you. Wonderful.
What was the original question about images? Yeah.
In what ways have you taken images from original sources?
So to go off what you were saying, I think that taking an image that's familiar to everyone, or not everyone, to many, who already come to that picture, let's say of, like for example, Alice in Wonderland. So I took a story and conjured all these images that this story brought up. There's a cartoon from Walt Disney, there's photographs that Lewis Carroll took, and then there's etchings, and so it's all of these different things that sort of, but what I brought to it was my sort of translation of what that story is about. But just if you use something that's already out there, if I say Alice in Wonderland, most people, it already comes with this story behind it, so there's something familiar, and you can use that as a diving off board. So that's a diving off point. That's why I chose what I did. But I think it's helpful to sort of use what's out there in that sense, whether it's a story or a photograph or a painting. I think it, can't help it.
I really as my position as a museum educator, the idea of helping people connect to art is everything for me, and artists want people to be able to connect. You're giving them something, and so I love you referencing like this diving off point, like where people might already have a level of understanding or comfortability, or like I get it, and it's a really like giving them a boost to get into something bigger, because you're acknowledging like they already kind of know about it.
It's the same with this serpent and the apple, Same idea.
Yeah, respecting the fact that the audience already knows a lot of things.
Come with that, yeah.
Cool.
I truly believe that all the images are already done. If I Google a gentleman with a pink shirt and glasses and a beard, there are going to be thousands and thousands of images that are going to come very similar to it. If I Google a lady with a flower dress, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of images that are going to come. And coming from that premise, to do something, I'm not sure if new, but something that it might have the possibility of being a little different. That might be that is always a good challenge for me. And trying to do it in a different way. Sometimes I caught myself plagiarizing my own self. I already took this picture before, what am I going to do, right? And I don't photograph too complicated. Essentially, is the person in front of me centered, making eye contact with the camera, and hopefully when it's in the wall, making eye contact with you, the viewer. But then, right, try to make it different in an interesting way. And one of the concepts that's constantly on my mind is seduction. I really want to seduce you to spend a little more time with that image. And talking about portraits and people, I came to portraits because of that selfish thing that I saw in galleries and museums, people spending a little more time when they see somebody that is talking to them, right? A figure. And then they will go to an abstract, and they will go to this and that, and I'm like, ooh, I want to do that. I want to keep the viewer for a couple more seconds. Yeah.
Thank you. I know I want to go off on that, but I want to stay in ways that we can all talk together. So I'm going to ask you guys the question that I asked the audience. What does it mean to own an image? Yeah, you have the microphone.
I cannot say ever that I own an image. The portraits that I take are highly collaborative, and if the person that is in front of me is there for the portrait, both of us can make a portrait. Otherwise, be myself is not going to be something that I consider that has some interesting value. Actually, last year they asked me to, for one of my images to be actually in a parking lot. Long story, and they gave me some money. And I felt so uncomfortable. I thought, this is not my image. I'm lucky that people are giving me their time and their image so I can make portraits. And I just grabbed the money, and the next couple of days I arrive at his home, and he's like, here's your cut. And he's like, what? But we live in a time, an era that we all borrow, steal, use, repost stuff. I don't know about you guys, but I think I'm super funny when I repost stuff. And I'm not. I'm really not funny at all, right? I'm just grabbing something, posting it with the right context, and like, hey, yeah, it's not me. It's not me at all. We have that now, that ownership of stuff that is just floating around, and we grab and steal and repurpose and whatnot. But I don't believe that images can be owned.
Thank you.
So I've been thinking about this for a little bit. I was trying to separate it, like organize that question in my head, like who owns an image. And this is probably just, it could be completely wrong, but for me personally, I separated it into, I was like, okay, well, what is an image, right? And I thought about it in 3 different ways, and it's like, okay, an image as idea, as object, and as experience, right? So I was like, an image as an idea, if I had to say who owned that, I would say it would be more, I would lean more towards the creator of that image or the collaborators on that image that came up with as an idea, right? That composition, everything. As an object, okay, now we're talking about the legalities. We're talking about, okay, it's something that's tangible, like a print, or I was thinking about it in that way, as an object. An image as an object, okay, well then you get into those kinds of things. Who paid for the image, whatever. But as an experience, I feel when you get to that point, who owns an image as an experience? It's everyone and no one. So I feel it's as an experience, an image is so individualistic. It doesn't matter who had the idea from the beginning, who owns the image as a tangible object or whatever. None of that matters when it comes to the experience of the individual looking at the image or being in the presence of the image and having that conversation with it.
Thank you, and honestly, I hadn't thought about that at all, even though that connects to something that I believe very deeply. So, working here, I'm obsessed with this museum. I call myself an art center fangirl. And I think the thing is, I say all the time that if this wasn't a free museum, I wouldn't feel the same way. Because even before I worked here, I felt such a sense of ownership of the pieces in the collection because I could have as many experiences with them as I wanted, and that I could build relationships with them, and I could be in their presence, and I could respond to them, and the way I thought and felt about them mattered. And so I didn't even think about owning an image in terms of the experience you have with it, but that's what we all get to do when we show up in front of an artwork. So thanks for tying that in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Borges always said, there in the a book. There are three of them. The writers that write it, the book itself, and the book that the readers. Right? Oh, yeah. I mean, so there are these three different. The object itself independent in a way, right? So I think the same thing with the artwork, the image. You know, the artist creates their own, and then you leave it the objects right there. You know, and then the whoever view it, they create their own image. They create their own their interpretation. You know, like because you can read the same book, but you may not read it in the same way, right? So I think the ownership is only, like I said, just the experience. We as the maker, the experience is who owns it. Well, it's the means. You have the voice, your own way of doing things, your own way of seeing the world. You know, that's what it means, really. I mean, aside from the legality of it, right? I mean, and then you leave it out there. It's the viewer creates their own view of the image.
Thank you. Something I've noticed just working closely with the artist too is like how valuable that is as an artist sometimes to hear how people respond to your work, because they build even deeper meaning for you within your work. And I think a lot of people are intimidated to share their interpretations with artists because they assume that like you know what your work means and I don't know what your work means. But it's like your work means different things to everyone, and that's all important.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely with that. Just reading sometimes like about a film, and so the director will say, "This is what the movie's about," and I'm like, "No, it's not." Like you can't. People have their own ideas of what their art is about, but you put something out there and it's interpreted. It's not yours anymore. And I think in terms of who owns the image, from an artist's point of view, I own that moment when I'm making it, and then it's done. So I live for that moment when we're, that energy and all that, like how good it feels to do that. But then I'm over it as soon as it's out there, because you can't control the context. You can't control anybody who brings how, there are different stories. We look at something, we all walk away with some other idea of what it's about. So I think everybody owns the image once you put it out there.
Thank you. I had an artist friend tell me once that all the work that you see exhibited or on display is just stuff that was like done enough to leave the artist's studio. Like just imagining like this stuff got thrown out because it's done and the artist has already moved on. And so to imagine like, yeah, I did it. Okay, and now I'm doing something else in here. Cool. So the next thing that I'm curious about is, all of your work I feel like is very like involved in stories and storytelling, whether that's like personal narratives, journalism, mythologies, like literature. And so, this is similar to the idea of like, where do you get your ideas from? But what stories do you feel like are worth retelling? Like, how do you decide that a story is worth making into a work of art?
In my view, to me, it's like some, like certain ideas or issues or, that concerns me, and to the point I'm almost obsessed or preoccupied. That's worth telling. I don't know whether it's worth telling to everybody, but at that moment it's important to me. And then after that, it's up to the viewer.
Cool. I like thinking about that just like concerns too, like things that you're figuring out, and using art as a form of figuring things out too.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Oftentimes, I think I don't know, it's like a therapy, it's cheap therapy, so you don't have to
Depending
hire
on your
anybody.
medium.
But it is true, and then sometimes you have to get it out, and then you learn from it, because you spend so much time thinking about it, so, and sometimes you have nothing to say, and when you really can't do anything, so.
Thank you.
I think with me, when it comes to with stories, I usually try to retell or tell stories that I feel haven't been told enough, because a lot of the pieces that I make I use my own family and friends as the subjects in these pieces, and I go into these with their stories in mind. So I want to tell the story let's say, I want to tell the story of my cousin who was in a bunch of trouble growing up, who on paper looks like this person you'd want to stay away from, but who I know had to raise his brothers and sisters since he was 10, 11 years old by any means necessary. So I'm going to tell his story in my way, so I'm going to put symbolism. I'm going to have an AK-47. I'm going to have some automatic in the background, but I'm going to have him carrying my son with a halo on his head, you know, and I'm going to have, and that's just one example, but I try to think of the stories of the people that are in the images. And I also, when I first started creating work that was really, really personal to me, I found myself in this lull where I wasn't creating for like, maybe like a year. I logged off of everything. I was creating, but I had no direction. And I stopped and I asked myself, what do I want to create if I'm creating for myself? If I'm creating for no one, what do I really, really, really want to say? It's not for a specific venue. It's not for a specific client. It's not for anything. It's just, what do I want to make? What do I want to talk about? And I remember thinking, like, I had this fleeting thought of, well, all the personal things that we grew up, especially like us culturally, like, oh, you don't talk about personal things. You brush things under the rug. You do not, like, and it's like, the stuff that made me a little nervous when I thought about talking about these stories, I'm like, what if I go with those? And that's when I started, like, you know, tapping into my personal stories and the people, like the stories of the people in my immediate circles, and started to unpack those stories. That's kind of what informed, like, my direction from that point on.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. So a few years ago, my son was obsessed with Stephen King, and so we were reading this book together about Stephen King's. He wrote a book about writing, and there was this, which is like a ridiculous like thing to quote, but it was sort of genius the way he said that he doesn't really take notes. He like keeps ideas, and then like a sieve, it's like the things that stick around later, everything else sort of is drained out, and whatever is left behind are these things that you kind of are turning around, and that's what, that story, whatever that is what you're drawn to. And I thought that was such a beautiful image because it was so, you know, it was just so visual. But I think that is true, and I think any kind of a story that asks me questions that I can't figure it out, and I can't stop thinking about it, and I look at it all these different ways, and you just keep turning it over and try to get rid of it, it's still there. Those are the stories that I think you have to tell. It's not a choice. It's like, you know, that's what you got to do. Yeah, you went 2 mics.
It's okay. Oftenly, I caught myself with the projects that I do thinking, who's going to be interested in this? It really starts from my own personal interest in the subject. And then from there, I try to investigate if these projects have some track and if these stories have some interest. I'm not thinking ever of an audience when I'm photographing, when I'm intaking a project. And sometimes it has been 5 years and I'm deep into this project and I'm like, ooh, I have to stop. Who is going to be interested in Mexican, Chicano, Chicanx, Latinx veterans? And then finding out that people really want to hear those stories. Who's interested in deported veterans just across the border in Tijuana and Juarez? And all of a sudden hearing like people being surprised that they don't know that these stories exist, and being appalled about the way that these people have been deported and discarded, right? And then I have the need, and I have pretty much a compromise with these people to tell a story the best that I can with my own experience. Something that is very important is that I have not met one single person that the story of their lives is dull or everybody that I meet with the correct, not the correct, with a certain amount of information and some questions, you can find out that anybody has a great story to tell. Anybody. And the older we get, the better it gets with the stories. So, yeah, again, I'm going to repeat. I never met one person who I thought like, that's very uninteresting. No, I always, I don't know. I think it's of enormous value, the lives that we're living, even if we think that they have, it's not a good story. But
Javier, I'm curious. I've like never heard that in my life. What you just said, that everyone's story is interesting if you take the time. And I'm curious now, like, why don't we all already know that? Because when you say that, I'm like, oh, of course. Like, of course, that affirms every experience that I've ever had, but why have I never heard that before? What makes us think that our stories aren't worth knowing? What do you think, like, prevents that from being something that we all already know?
I think it might come from TV, news, cinema, that if we think that is not something heroic or has certain qualities of beauty and aesthetic, is really, it doesn't matter. I mean, we have this fascination with celebrities and whatnot. Let me give you an example. Yesterday, it was our free day. Bobby was busy with his kid, and I went around. I found a local shop. I got a hat from there. And I sat down with the owner for about 20 minutes, and we talked about our lives. We talked about how she has been in the business of hat selling for 20 years. Unfortunately, about 15 years ago, her husband passed, and now she's thinking about moving on and selling the business. And that's like a super moving story. And that's an absolutely beautiful story. And I was fortunate that she gave me even more time to take out my camera and my tripod, and I took a portrait. And she took my portrait with the hats that I bought. So it was an amazing exchange.
I mean, because you must be an amazing listener, and that's part of the gift of being an artist that you have, is that you listen in a way that, informs making your art. And so some people, I mean, yes, I think everybody has interesting stories, but often we're like, oh, whatever, and, you dismiss it. But being an amazing listener, that's an incredible quality.
That helps. Yeah, that helps a lot. I'm not sure if I'm amazing at anything, but for sure, I try to pay attention and really listen to what people have to say. In this time where our attention span is crazy, I was reading, is now with social media, it's 8 seconds. We have to move. We have to, I don't know where, right? We have to be moving fast.
I don't know where
the
we're
next image and the next story is coming, and we should not miss it. And we just use that thumb, and we are going like crazy. 8 seconds. And corporations are banking on this because they know that they can do something in 8 seconds. It used to be 13 seconds.
Jeez.
But now so I'm all for slowing down, taking time to listen to people, taking time. And sometimes people want to also listen to our stories. And this is actually a great that you want to listen to us and give us some time to share what we do.
Thank you. I can't help but think that because you took that time, how much more meaningful your hat is.
Real quick, I wanted to talk about like what you were talking about, people being so used to these stories on TV and things. I thought back to like the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell, right? It's just like that. Yeah, it's like they have this set like yeah, like this template, you know, and it's like you guys go through this and you go through the cave, you battle your dragon, and you come out and you get back. It's like, but people are in so many different eras of that entire thing, and there could be none of that journey, like none of that template. That template could be like obsolete. But when talking about Javier listening, I wanted to point out something with our collaborative project. So when I got to see my personal family, my family and friends that were really more reserved and more guarded. And I would see Javier listening as he's setting up everything and asking them questions about their life. My grandma and them, stuff that I didn't even know. He's setting up to do this portrait and asking them questions along the way. And then boom, boom, and tell me more. And then like, and they're just like talking because they've never had a chance to talk to anyone, and no one's ever asked these things. So he's setting up and they're telling these stories that they've never been able to tell anyone. And then when he puts up the camera and says, okay, it's time, they stop, but you know, they're still telling the story, but through their eyes now. And so this is it's like, he's still listening, but he's listening through the lens now. And he's listening in a way that's just understood, you know, and then he snaps the picture. And so you see the public, you see the portraits, they're still telling these stories. He's still listening, we're still listening. And I think that's a beautiful thing to see.
Thank you. Okay, so you touched on this when you were talking about social media, so I'm curious. I have a question. In a time where primary audiences expect things immediately and constantly, how does this affect the artist? Do you feel pressured to have a presence on social media? And do you think that artists sharing work online dilutes or elevates the artwork in any way? So I'm thinking like content versus art.
Well, I think social media, to me, I don't think it's unless you work specifically about social media, you know, like presence online. I think when you create art, to me, when I create my own, I don't think about the audience that much because I can't. I mean, really, it's hard enough to think about your own problem, right? Let alone trying to think of somebody else's, what they want, they don't want, right? I mean, so in terms of social media, I think it's a great tool. It's a tool to promote your work. And also even to for people to have access to see them. And then, you know, before the era of internet, you know, I have to go to London or I have to go to, you know, to New York to see, you know, to see artwork, right? I mean, but now you have access, and that's wonderful. That will inspire people wanting to see the actual things. Because when you see the actual things, it is not the same as looking at the reproduction, but at least it gives you the window or the opportunity to say, hey, there is something in there, right? And that's really wonderful. I think that's about social media. But in terms of presence, and it doesn't affect me. I mean, I make my own thing, you know, old-fashioned web, and then the rest of them, it's out there, I think, you know. And so.
Thank you.
I think I used to feel like that pressure, that clock, like that, like, oh, we gotta hurry up, we don't know where, but we're going somewhere. And I used to feel that, like, if I'm not posting at a certain, then what? Like, do I disappear? Do I become like what happens? Like, if I don't post after a certain amount of time? Like, I used to feel that pressure, and then I would create something and then feel about it. Like, I didn't feel good. Like, but then I learned to just not worry about that. Like, no works in progress. The only time I'm gonna post a work in progress nowadays is if I already know what the finished product is gonna look like, what I already know pretty much, or I have a good example. I'm not gonna post something and like check on like likes and stuff for feedback, or I could not do that. I'm not gonna let that inform I couldn't, not anymore. But on the other side of that, so I have the web series Voces y Visiones, where I use art and this started during the pandemic. I use art as a catalyst to explore issues in our community, and I invite experts from different fields. So let's say it started with an invitation during the pandemic. Everybody was, Skyping and everything. That's what the beginning of all that. And they asked me to do a studio visit over Skype. And I'm like, okay, I can show you. I can do a studio visit. I can show you paintings of like my homeboys or whatever, my cousins. I'm like, or would it be possible, I just went up. Would it be possible to actually invite a friend of mine and we just sit there in front of the camera and we talk about the issues in my work? A friend of mine, he's from South Central LA, I'm from South Texas, and how about we explore the Chicano experience and what's being explored in my work, and how about we just go from there? And we did that, and from then on we started a series because people were like, we were talking about PTSD in our neighborhoods, and they were like, oh, you gotta unpack that more. You should really go for that. So we started a series, and we started going live on Facebook, and I start every piece of mine, and then I linked up with my friends at Mayo Clinic and in other fields, right? So we started this series where once a month we do an episode. I start the episode with a painting of mine. Like, let's say the episode 1, season 1 was PTSD. I start with images of like an installation that I made, talking about domestic abuse, talking about things that I grew up with, poverty, and talking about PTSD. Well, then we invite the guest to help us unpack ways of coping, resources, actionable steps, things that we can do. I started finding a way to put the art to work on social media. So now we have my family and friends tune in from Texas, California, like some people in like Hawaii, and like you see it on the live feed, like them having discussions, the one about substance abuse. They're helping each other out, like encouraging each other. And this starts with using art as the catalyst on social media. So that's just 2 different ways of like looking at it.
Yeah, thank you. And your story, like you were deeply inspired to do a big project, but just narrowing that down to the fact that like digitally can create community, can connect people. And it's like, oh yeah, that's true too.
I don't really use any social media. I mean, I'm a horrible self-promoter, but I also don't know how to connect like that. It embarrasses me. That probably has to do with my age, but I'm just like, oh no, I can't do that. So it's not really a thing I use.
What do you think about it?
I think it's important. I mean, I have 2 kids, and they both, especially during the pandemic, it's like that, like they felt like they were in the same room with their friends. I think it's important. I love the idea of it. I just, personally, a friend of mine told me this story, and it sort of it doesn't make any sense, but he was like, I said, are you gonna go out on Facebook when Facebook first started? And he goes, God, no, I don't want some girl calling out to me and saying, hey, I've got your kid, so come on, step up to the plate. And I go, I know what you mean. And he goes, that doesn't make any sense with a woman. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. But it's just sort of that idea of like, oh God, no, I can't, like, it just has something to do with like, it's not my thing, but I appreciate it for sure.
Too easy of access to people.
Yeah, or just, it makes me feel naked.
Yeah.
It makes me feel naked.
Thank you.
So when I was starting my MFA, I got an artist come by, one of the visiting artists, and the first thing that he told me, he said, are you on Instagram? And I'm like, I don't care about that. You should. If you're an artist, you should do this. And I'm like, that word should always makes me a little anxious. Eventually I did. And since the beginning, I have not taken that serious at all. I do not comprehend the algorithms. I don't comprehend the feeds. I post, usually I do not post my art. Every now and then, yes, but for the most part, these are notes that I'm taking, and I'm just putting them out there to see who might like them. Crazy enough, now Instagram is doing all these changes, and somehow this algorithm thinks that I like fights. And I open it, and there's street fights, bar fights, and I'm like, did I like, by mistake, some of this crap? And then all of a sudden, fights and sharks. I'm into sharks. I'm all over sharks. But, I mean...
It's probably the sharks that started it.
This is some kind of crazy thing that all of a sudden, all ages, all races, all times, fights. And like, how can I get away from this crazy thing? It's kind of insane. So, I mean, I do not take it seriously at all. I post as a game, right? Throw it out there. People see it, people like it, people comment. We have a little conversation of 2 lines and move on.
And then they send you sharks and fights.
Sharks and fights. Well, the crazy thing, I mean, in this era of self-display, right? I am here. And I take note of that because, I mean, I like to analyze where photography is going and what is it doing and how are we posing. And in the 1800s, you see all the portraits and people are like this. Because this is who I am and I'm gonna present my camera like this. But now it's more complicated because we smile and we do this and we do duck faces and I'm like, what are we doing? This is insane. This is me happy here. This is me traveling there. I couldn't do that for my life. I mean, I find it funny and I take it more as an analysis of where photography is going and how do we conduct ourselves in front of a camera? How do we act for the camera? And you can see people, right, in anywhere. Take out the camera and then immediately just go there and see it. And it's like instant, curating their own life. I cannot do that for my life. I'm a very private person. And again, like you, Facebook, I have never had Facebook. I don't want anybody to find me or know my past or anything like that. I am content of like the present and people that I meet face to face.
Thank you. So I have one last question. And I'm wanting you guys to think back in your childhood, looking back at your history, and what is the first image that either had a powerful effect on you, made you inspired to be an artist, or changed something in the way that you think or see?
Well, I'm not, I mean, actually, probably artwork that have the biggest impact on me. That, you know, I mean, I've seen artwork, I grew up with artwork at home, but probably one painting probably that was the biggest impact on me. It took me to understand the values and all that. It's probably Grunewald, Eisenheim altarpiece in Colmar. You know, I mean, I've seen reproduction of it for many, many years until I've seen it, the actual piece. That was the first time that I was just like, this is probably one of the greatest painting of all time. I think, truly. I mean, it was magnificent piece, you know. So, you know, and that makes I understood for the first time what great artwork or what artwork means, you know. So.
Thank you.
I think two like really, really distinct memories of artwork that I came across that stood out. It was one, my uncle graduated really young, and he left. He was one of the first people to leave the city limits in my family. He graduated, and he was like the youngest attending the University of Texas at Austin at the time. So when he would come visit, I was staying with my grandmother, and he would come and bring me books and like star charts and random things, like all these random. And he brought me one time a book of conceptual architecture sketches, like conceptual houses, and I thought these were like so cool, because it was like, it got me thinking like beyond my current circumstances and living situation. These were just beautiful works of art. And around that same time, my dad was sending artwork from prison, and he was sending sketches, beautiful things that were on the envelopes and on these things called paños, which are handkerchiefs, and they were like sprayed with like milk and water, hardened up, and then he would like ballpoint pen sketches. So I saw two different, really different works of art. One was like conceptual, and these things like made me think of like fantastical, whimsical places outside of my circumstances. Other one was direct storytelling of the circumstances we were in. So seeing those two things, those two different worlds like lived in me from that point on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Like if I think back, like the first image, remember that these photographs, like they were square with a white border around them, and it's just a snapshot, but it was a picture of that my father had taken, and he's taking it like this, and it's of my mother, who was pregnant with my brother Jake, who's here. And she's standing with a Monopoly board over her face because she's embarrassed and her stomach is out. So it's the weirdest picture, but I remember so well trying to figure out what was going on in it. And I have that picture. I still like remember the first time I saw that picture and just being like, what is happening here? Because his feet are in the picture. And then it's just her tummy and then this Monopoly board. And it's just, like, I couldn't understand it, and I think it's just the most beautiful image, like, in the entire world because of that.
To picture it, is the Monopoly board facing with the...
It's like this, in the picture.
But is it like the places, or is it the back of the board?
No, it's the box.
Okay, the box.
And she's holding it over her, and you just see her tummy and his feet coming in the picture. It's just so weird, but it's really beautiful because it's so weird. But
awesome.
I mean, it really was like a real, I can't figure this one out.
I can see the influence in that in your work.
Okay, a couple quick stories. When I was around, because I always thought that I started photographing at 13, and a couple years ago that I went back to Mexico to my mom, and she's like, no. You, when you were 6, you demanded to bring a camera to summer camp. And you came back with pictures of the grass and of the sky to show your mom that there was green grass at camp and a blue sky. So that is in art making, right? Or image making, not even art. That is my first recollection. When I was from 13 years old to all the way to 16, I didn't thought about photography as art. I thought about photography as a business, a complete failed business, because I couldn't make a dime with my photos. I was photographing dance and theater troupes. And I will spend a lot of time. I spend my money buying my rolls of film, and then I will go to a makeshift darkroom that I have, and I spend hours making these beautiful prints, and then I will go to the theater director. It's like, here, have them. And he will go like, how much are these? It's like, okay, they're $3 a piece. Okay, I'm gonna go 1 and 2, thank you. And I'm like, $6, and I spend hours on the rehearsals and hours on developing and printing. My business just crumbled. And it was not until I went to an exhibition of Álvarez Bravo in Mexico City, not Manuel, for those of you who follow photography, not Manuel Álvarez Bravo, but Lola Álvarez Bravo, his wife, that I thought, this is incredible. You can really do this with photography, and you can move me in a way that is completely unexpected. I'm going to start to photograph other stuff. I'm going to start to tell stories. I'm going to look at form and shape and light, and it was through seeing that exhibition. And I can point like a couple of the images. One is a carousel horse, and just a simple carousel horse. It was so moving, so violent, and so delicate, and so seductive that I fell in love with her and her work, and the idea that I can make art with photography.
Thank you. How we started talking about how we all bring different things when we're looking at art, and how we kind of came to the conclusion that the viewer owns the image. Hearing your individual stories about being young and absorbing and interpreting a work of art is so powerful, to recognize that, like, even before we have much experience with art, that it's something that hits us early. So it's pretty cool to have those realizations just through these conversations. So now we get to ask all of you guys to ask us questions. So Jill and Laura have microphones, and you guys can raise your hands, and then you can get a microphone. And we got until like 7:30.
Hi, I would like to kind of touch on a little bit different aspect of the first thing you brought up about who owns an image. And, you know, art and music enrich us as a society, provoke thought, and can be catalyst of change, bring joy. And I would like to see an artist have some form of remuneration so that they can keep creating art and keep enriching society. So from that perspective, how would you look at ownership?
It's lovely when I get paid for a photo, for sure. But I'm not sure if that's my ultimate goal. And I appreciate the question, and I appreciate when somebody's interested in one of my images to have in their home office or wherever. But it's complicated because 90-something% of what I do is portraiture, and I'm conflicted with selling that image of them. So I decided to work real hard in something else that subsidizes my art making. I teach at Carleton College in Minnesota, and that's the one that pays and subsidizes my love and passion for art. And so I do not push sales. I don't push the economical aspect of the art making on my case. But I agree with you. I mean, we should get paid, and we should be remunerated for what we do, for sure.
So some forms of art lend themselves more to copying, or to being able to be copied, or to be able to see like the whole thing at once. Like, I think of sculpture being less copyable than a photograph or a drawing, or like the whole movie being less copyable than a single image. How do you think that affects ownership with viewers and artists alike?
To me personally, I think as an artist, once you make your artwork, you put it out there, you really have very little control other than you want to fight for the legal aspect of it. You know what I mean? And it's, to me personally, it's not worth fighting for. I mean, I have better things to do than worrying that someone's going to take my pictures, right? And then use it. And in some way, probably you should be kind of like proud that someone want to use it. Because I don't know, I mean, you know, and we have something else to do. I think we have, you know, because like we said earlier, once you make it, when it's done, you put it out there, you move on, right? I mean, you can't just dwell on it, that, oh, someone's going to steal it, or, well, just don't have to worry about it.
I have a friend, I told Mia this story, who she lifted this guy, Robert Lang. He's an origami artist. And he had put out a book of origami patterns. And she took the patterns and blew them up and, you know, painted the colors in. And that was her work. And she sold these paintings for a stupid amount of money. One of them turned up on the cover of Wallpaper magazine. And Robert Lang saw this. And it was a fascinating argument because this was a, you know, what he had, it wasn't the thing. The object itself is the origami. This is a pattern. And there was this legal, like, insanity over, you know, is she stealing from him? I mean, or, you know, is it completely different, you know, animal because it's a different material? But I thought it was a fascinating argument, so I made a film about it, and then she tried to sue me. And now we're friends again. Because she didn't win.
This is a super interesting question. So let me tell you a little story. One, the piece that Bobby and I have here, it is exactly about that. It's about giving out the ownership, right? You can actually take our publication with you home. And that's something that is super interesting. Is in newspaper print. So people are, if they leave it in the car, it's going to yellow and it's going to decay and is right. And it's great. We saw a kid yesterday that was in her little seat was grabbing the thing all crumbled. Yesterday was Monday. We went to the architectural surplus thing that you guys have here. It's a wonderful place, 4 floors. We went through the full 4 floors, and the attendant, a kid, come to us. He's like, "Where are you visiting us from?" We're like, "Oh, we're..." No. He said, "What brings you to Des Moines?" And we said, "Well, actually, the art center brought us here, so we have a piece over there, and we did a workshop." And he said, "What piece did you make?" And it's like a little newspaper, and he's like, "I have that, and we're looking for a frame. And if we can find a frame that fits that picture, we're gonna frame it." And I'm like, that is so cool. That is somebody thinks that right, that all of a sudden that can be something, not discarded, not thrown away, but framed and put into their houses, right? Am I thinking about economical or copyrights or anything like that? No, we were super happy. We left out like, this is so cool. This kid just, and he said like, "Give me your names. I'm gonna call my girlfriend and I'm gonna tell them that we met you." And it's like, this is so cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we actually talked about that for a minute afterwards. We were like, "Oh yeah, that's so cool." But I think also, when thinking about it like that, like economically, I feel like I try not to do that. Like me, personally, especially with my conceptual work, more contemporary stuff, I try not to think like that. I just make the work and go from there. Where I mostly focus, like the economic stuff, is like Voces y Visiones, my web series. Okay, it's sponsors and things like that. But that's about community work using art. But it's not really about the art itself, right? When I'm thinking about those kinds of questions, about what's copyable, things like that, I try to think about it in the same way I think about if I tell somebody an idea, oh, don't tell them that they're gonna take that. But in a way, I don't like to live in a state of scarcity. I like to live in a state of abundance. So I feel like it's there. Go boom, boom. Like there's more than enough. Like each blade of grass doesn't have to fight the next blade of grass to grow right beside it. And there's so much, So I like to live in that state of abundance rather than the state of scarcity.
I have a follow-up question. And full disclosure, I am the chief registrar here at the Domain Art Center, and I enforce copyright. And I always do it thinking that I'm protecting the interests of the artist. That said, I have a question about your process. Do you feel like these legal restrictions hinders your creative process? Does it help? Obviously, yeah. How does it affect your process, I should say?
What kind of restrictions?
Copyright restrictions. Like if you're working with derivative works, or does that make sense?
I mean, just personally, just real quick, as far as restrictions go in the creative process, for me, a lot of times restrictions are a good thing, because if it's everything, anything, all the time, then I'll never do anything, period. Like, I just won't. Like, some people can tell me, hey, do a painting. Can you do me a painting? I love, of what? Of anything. Don't do that. What do you mean? Like the entire expanse of like existence? I'm gonna do yeah, I will try to capture everything on there. Please give me some restrictions. But no, that's just my real quick spiel on restrictions.
I think I do not take it lightly. I think it's very important. Throughout the past 2-3 years, my wife is also an artist, and she had to correct people that have published her art without permission. And not only without permission, but writing in a completely wrong way about what she's a printmaker. And we had to have that conversation, and it's like you have to email these people to either correct or to stop doing that, because it's harmful, right? We do have an intent and we do have a purpose, but all of a sudden, I mean, I can give the freedom to the viewer in a museum to interpret and to have their own story, and that's great. But all of a sudden, when they're grabbing something and first cashing on that, right? I think it's problematic. It has always been problematic. And I mean, myself, I've been in situations that I filmed a performer, and I came up with the site, I came up with everything, I came up with 7 goats to do the shoot. And then she says, like, it's mine. It's like, wait, no, we were collaborating. I'm not your videographer, I am, right? And then it ended up right there, right? I say, I don't want any problems, take that piece, and that's it. I show it very little because of that uncomfortable situation.
I mean, I keep thinking of Richard Prince and taking these pictures. This artist took pictures from Instagram and blew them up and said, here's my art, and sold them for a shitload of money. And so I think these, because the access to images is the, it's kind of punk rock, and it's like that question of what is ours and how much that pushes, how far you can push that is an interesting argument to me. I don't feel like there's a right or wrong answer. I think that artists are continuing to sort of like tip their toe in and where they're going to cause trouble or not. It's going to be 10% of the image or 50% of the image. And I mean, it's fascinating how when you have these sort of weird rules, how you're kind of work around them or try to figure out a way to do that, or even work with the other artist. Back to the Robert Lang and Sarah Morris, he said, listen, you can keep the money, just put my name on the paintings. And she said, no, not doing that. So, I mean, it's just that it's like, I mean, in some way, I think it's better just to say, look, hey, Robert Lang, I'm going to use your, why would you use origami patterns from somebody who's alive? Anyway, that was my argument. But you should, I mean, I think out of like respect, why wouldn't you just contact that artist and say, hey, I'm going to do this. Like, what do you think? Like, let's talk about it.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, me, I was wearing a round gown.
I did that on.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, so, I think that the copyright thing is an interesting issue, but I think it's more of the legal side of it. In terms of the creative part of it, artists, like I personally, I just don't think much about it, because it's too exhausting in a way, to worry about it. That someone's gonna take my pictures, gonna steal it. It's like, well, if they're gonna steal it, just like let it go. To me personally, just let it go. I mean, to me, it's it doesn't.
How did you personally become to like the beauty of art?
What was that, Lizzie?
Could you repeat it one more time? Do you want to repeat it?
How did you personally become to love the beauty of art?
I don't think it's complicated. My sister is a year older than I am, and she's a ballerina, and she's been a ballerina since she was three years old. So I've been looking at dance and theater and music and paintings since I remember. I'm not sure if I can pinpoint the time where I say like, this is, right? My love now is unconditional towards art. It has been since I remember.
So same with me, because I grew up with it, because my dad collects painting, my mom collects antiques, I grew up with it. My grandfather was a goldsmith, so just always there, so.
I think since I was real young, well, at least getting into art when I was making it, like I loved the fact that you could disappear into this world. Like even if you were like, when I would do drawings and stuff, I would zoom in and I would just be lost in like every mark that I was gonna make next, and the lines and the colors, and even if I was doing like a comic book thing, like a cartoon or just whatever. I love the fact that with the art you could disappear into a world. And now, even now, when you look at a painting or a sculpture, photography, anything, you're still disappearing into these worlds, into these other little mini universes. But I don't know about the moment that I got into it. All I know is that ever since I was really, really small, I loved to disappear into these little worlds, and art gave me that door that I could open and go into these worlds.
For me, it's escape. It's like that you kind of you see something and you have a passion for it, and it's like you just get drawn more and more into it. And I think if you watch your sister or what, it takes you to this other place, and that's sort of, that for me is same.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, when I didn't enjoy all of it. Just sitting and performance after performance of dance and like, we're doing this again, right? This is dreadful. But eventually, knowing more, for sure, gives you the tools to appreciate it more.
Hi, I'm a science teacher, and I wanted to say thank you to all of you for the personal sharing that you did of your process and describing everything. I was curious if any of you had given consideration to helping teachers, not just with the obvious, like you take a photo and you would say, okay, why did this person take this photo? What is it representative of? But to look at things from a completely different way. So for example, I use shade and tone of paint chips to help kids understand titration in chemistry. And when I looked at the photo of the gentleman holding out his tongue that was tattooed, that was the most wonderful thing on a number of levels, but I looked at it from a biology level. And I wonder if there would be any way that artists could start doing something where they said, here's our interpretation of the work. You've put together a book or something that you're selling, but also to have some kind of repository online, because teachers can get different artwork for free because of how we're using it, but to give us the power to do more than our interpretation or the one way that we're using it in a classroom setting. Like to unleash the power of it, as you had said about you do the discussion about your work, and now it's on a podcast or Zoom or whatever. I'm sorry, I'm not connecting it, but it was refreshing to hear people say something so wonderful, and then how do we bring it back to make it more useful in the classroom? That it's not just art, it's not just in the art classroom, it is literally something that we can teach with.
I'm going to give you, what grades do you teach?
I usually teach middle school to high school.
Okay, so throughout a whole year, I will get to speak somewhere around 10 to 15 times in different places. And there's always South High School in South Minneapolis that contacts me, and I do a Zoom with not only one classroom, but whomever wants to drop in from the school. And that one I don't charge, I do it for free. Everything else, I know universities and museums have some money to bring me to places and to speak and whatnot, but that one specifically, I do it like I know that is going to be something relevant for their students, so I do not charge. I do not know of a repository other than Art21 might be one of them, and Art21 is free, and there's small short films about different artists around the nation that can for sure help.
Thank you, everyone. I was going to ask the question about credit lines, but that I think you've addressed that. But What do you think about one of the really wonderful, I guess, seminal works of the 1990s was Felix Gonzalez Torres's untitled work, Death by Gun, which was a unstoppable pile, it's constantly printed, a pile of papers with all photographs of the 500 people who were killed by guns that is constantly replenished. And it was an act really of extraordinary generosity, which I think went in the face of appropriation. It was an artist's response to that. And so can you think of creative ways of going against the, this constant appropriation, or do you think he made the ultimate statement?
I don't think there's a way to stop it. I think and I'm going to repeat myself again, the era of borrowing, stealing, repurposing, reposting, I think is here to stay. We all do it. Some of us with different ethic standards, but I don't think is something that can or should be stopped. I think reprocessing, liquefying information over and over again and putting it out, I think it serves some kind of purpose. And yeah, I don't know what that is, but I think it's going to be hard to stop. Being that said, I will invite you all to come during museum hours and take one of our publications and bring it home. And it's going to be just fine if you, in a couple of days, you're bored and you discard that, or if you're going to keep it for a couple of months. Yeah.
I mean, I think part of it is access, and it's important, I think, to make work that's for anybody to see. And I think if you start to shut that down, you're like, only these people can see it, right? Because at this point in time, everybody takes pictures of everything. You can't control that. So, I mean, I guess you could make art that you're like, okay, you have this, here's a curtain, you gotta pay so much money, you can take a peek and then you're out. No cameras. So, I mean, it really goes against with what art is about now, you know, in terms of access and the democracy of like, anybody can see it. Anybody can take a picture, anybody can have that. And I think that's really beautiful, you know, just that idea of like being able to create with your phone. Anybody can do that. I mean, I think it's beautiful.
I know we're supposed to be on the last question, sorry, but it seems to me it comes at least one thing. So is authenticity important anymore? Is it relevant? Because, you know, we've been talking about, at least from what I'm hearing, it affects all sorts of things, you know, from like recipes, right? Sorry, you know, kind of lump this with you, comida latina, you know, I mean, like this, you know, someone says, oh, this is authentic. You know, it doesn't matter what ethnicity it is. You know, I teach as well. That's one of the things I asked students frequently, is I said, does it matter?
I feel like that's one of the most important things.
In 2022, do we care? You know, should we care?
I feel like that's one thing that we absolutely do care about now more than ever, is authenticity. In a sea of noise, I feel like one of the things that does stand out is authenticity, you know, and it stands out to the people, to the people when it matters. But I feel like that's absolutely one of the most important things nowadays that can, you know, at least give you that little oasis in this sea of information and noise.
And for me, I want to respond to that with, I think for me, more important than authenticity is sincerity. Saying something because you mean it. because, we had work from artist Justin Favela last summer, and he explained sometimes that when we talk about things being authentic, we're actually thinking about like classism, because some people don't have the opportunity to travel and experience the authentic thing. So, like the way that a community makes tacos is just as valid because it's authentic and sincere to that community. So I think, I think that authenticity can be a challenging thing though too, where it's like, are we talking about being sincere? Are we talking about its origins? Are we talking about taking something that's not mine and appropriating it? I think that gets complicated, but I think that more important than authenticity is sincerity.
Yeah, I think I was meaning more like that, in that way, not.
Yeah, or juxtaposing something. And yes, okay, you took this picture of this orange, but if I take this picture of this orange and I put it here between these things, then there's something different about it. It's an idea. It's a different idea. It's my authentic idea. We're not being as greedy about the image. It's just more about ideas and sort of how we can stretch them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and also it's interesting. I think at home I have this print engraving. It's from 1710 by what's his name, Nicholas Dorigny, of a copy of Daniel Volterra's painting. The engraving was done almost 200 years later, right? So the engraving, and then there is the painting by Volterra. But it's interesting, I discovered that particular painting was, the original drawing was Michelangelo's drawing, right? So this is like a recycled idea, right? But the three objects are completely different, even though they look the same, but the experience are different looking at the actual painting in color, on oil, and then the print. It's completely different, So I think every process, oftentimes the process, when you do it, creates an authenticity that is very, very different than, like digital product. For example, if you have a painting and digitally reproduced, it is not the same at all. It looks the same, but it's not, And certain object is almost impossible to reproduce. Like if you look at a Pollock in photograph, it's just won't cut it. You have to see the actual thing because of the texture, the surface, and all that stuff, I think. Yeah.
I think inevitably we have influences, all of us, in the way we speak, the way we conduct ourselves, the way we make art, everything. And if you go the scientific way, DNA, if you go the social way, it can be another animal. One of the projects that I like to give to my students is very simple, and they roll their eyes when they hear about the project. I take a piece of paper, and I take, where the spiral rips the paper? I take that strip, and I give, okay, this is going to be our hero, and everybody's going to photograph it in a way that is different, in your own way. And they come up with extraordinary stuff. That project has evolved, and I have an inflatable decoy coyote, and I keep it inflated, and each one of the students have to go out and photograph that same item in however they want. The only couple rules is do not paint it and do not puncture it. I have to go through 4 because they have been stolen, and one of them was attacked during a photo shoot by a dog. But the coyote has gone to Germany. The coyote has gone to Vegas. This wonderful photo of one of my students' mom and the 2 aunts laughing in the pool with the coyote, and it has gone give me 5 years and I'm going to make a book out of that, because it's so interesting. So it is, we have influences, but we have the capacity to do our own thing. And you talk about Comida Latina. It's interesting. I live in Minneapolis, and it's very hard for me to get authentic Mexican cuisine. Does that prevent me from going and getting some tacos somewhere? No. No, I still go and try to enjoy them and try to like merge in the atmosphere and all that stuff, knowing that my mom cooks like way better, right? Yeah, I was passing myself, but that's a take, right? Context, place, and time.
Mia, you want to wrap it up?
Yes, thank you all so much. I'm going to ask you to take your note card and share that with someone in the next 2 days. So take what you thought about Who Owns Images, talk to someone else about it, and now we can applaud our artists. Thank you.